I just hope it's a wonderful and insightful shir in the end. Thank you very much for coming out, and thank you to Ari and Ruben for arranging it. And I'd like to thank Kodesh Baruch Hu for arranging history that makes it so interesting this time of history, except for the fact that what's going on today is not exactly something that you can thank Kodesh Baruch Hu for in a positive, pleasant way. There's a lot that's happening. A lot that's shifting. Even the world itself shifted. Apparently the day got shorter after this earthquake. What happened in Japan, what happened this last Shabbos in Itamar, it certainly hits home more. My daughter lives in Tepuch at this point. I'm very close by, and they're having an emergency meeting this evening to deal with the situation. So it makes it a little more personal. And there's a lot of perspective that has to be achieved. The person has to understand what's happening today because it's very taxing. It's very taxing intellectually, it's very taxing emotionally, and it's very easy to lose it. It's very easy to fall apart the seams, especially all the pressure. Today, I think the BBC blamed the last Shabbos' terrorist act on the settlers themselves. With that if we weren't there, this is to be expected. The truth is it took a day longer than I thought it would take before they finally came out with a statement like that. But just to get perspective, just understand and appreciate where things are holding, as much as this may be out of the ordinary for many people, it's not really. Unfortunately, it's not really. It's exactly what was destined to happen. If we don't do certain things, don't change certain things. I've spoken of this before in the past. We've gone over some of these issues before, but it's always important to get perspective and incorporate the new with the old to get the big picture. That's always the bottom line. The big picture. What is the Kodesh Baruch Hu doing? I wish I could tell you exactly when it's all going to end. I wish I could say what some people say that the Mashiach is just around the corner, although that's what I personally believe, based upon specific, ideas and events and information. But we're all hanging, we're all up in the air. But if you stand back and you take a look at the situation with a big picture view, all of a sudden the pieces come together. And you can see, in spite of what's happening, in spite of the difficulty, in spite of the tsaros, the sorrow, and the destruction, that somehow it's all working towards a positive end. That's our belief. It may be hard to say the words, it may be hard to accept the words, but that's our belief. And the Sitra Achra and Amalek have tried all through history. The number one thing they tried to make the Jewish people do is despair. That's the number one thing. Because a Jew cannot remain connected to Kodesh Baruch Hu in a state of despair. Can't serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Can't do the Avodas Hashem. Can't have the Bitachon and can't have the Emunah. We have to fight against despair. And the number one way to fight against despair is to understand as much as possible what a Kodesh Baruch Hu is doing. So, you have to step back and you have to look at what's been going on and go back as far as you possibly can. So, personally, I can do that to some degree, because this is not new to me. When I wrote my first version of the book, Not Just Another Scenario, there was a reason for it. I wasn't looking to become a best-selling writer because those books don't become bestsellers for the most part. There was a reason behind it. And when I wrote it, it was the summer of 2001. And everyone said, wow, 2001. I know. No, it wasn't yet 2001 as you know it. It was still the summer of 2001. The world was still quiet. The Twin Towers still stood. The Jewish people still went about their business like history was going to go on for thousands of years more. It's all different Messias than it is today. The world has changed dramatically, very dramatically since 2001. But go back further. Go back to 1999. Go back to 1998. It's a different world. Totally different world. And we have to understand what the change was and why the change occurred. The reason why I wrote the first book back at that time was because I had seen something. I had learned something. I was fortunate to be able to be exposed to certain concepts, certain ideas that changed my whole perspective of Jewish history. And it got to a point that it was so powerful and so imminent that I was forced to share it. And I got to tell you, when I wrote the first book, what I really wanted to write was the second book. The second book I wrote was called Talking About the End of Days. Talking About the End of Days was a book full of sources and makoros about the end of days. But today you hear the end of days. I remember once going to speak on a speaking trip in North America, and I had been posting these things. I began my website specifically to deal with the issues of Achos Yamin, to open people's minds, to prepare. That's the whole word. Prepare, preparation. The Jewish people are all about preparation. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah says that if a person prepares before Shabbos, you'll eat on Shabbos. Because on Shabbos you can't cook. Shabbos, you're limited in the preparations you can do. So all the preparations have to take place in advance of Shkia. And if you do all the preparations in advance of Shkia, then you'll eat on Shabbos like a king and a queen. But if you don't eat, you don't prepare before Shabbos, says the Gemara, what will you eat on Shabbos? But this is not talking only about food and Shabbos, as much as that's a large part of what we're about. But that's not the main point the Gemara is making. The Gemara is telling us it's all about hachana, preparation. You have to be able to anticipate what's coming up. Ezu chacham harois anoilen. Right? Who's a chacham? Somebody who can see what's being born. Someone who can see the events as they're transpiring and where they're going, what they're going to do, and what they can possibly result in. Then you can be prepared. The more prepared you are, the less you're going to be subject and a victim of history. And that's what the Jewish people have been over and over and over and over again. Victims of history, over and over again. Yes, stop that already. Hopefully at some point in time we wake up and read the messages. We see the hashgacha because the Kosh Baruch Hu is always talking to us. And I wrote the book, not just another scenario, as a novel, because I was so nervous to talk about Mashiach. And I was so concerned about talking about Achos Yamin. So I had to couch it in a story that people would read the story and say, it's just a novel anyhow, just using his imagination. But, it's not really, fact or history, But behind every idea in that book was a fact. Behind every detail in that story was a makor, was a source. So after, I survived that, I wrote the next book talking about the end of days, where I said, okay, now that we saw the story, here are the sources behind that. And all of a sudden, history began to change at the same time. And as a result of this, people began speaking about Mashiach more and more. And today, newscasters, radio stations talk about Armageddon, the end of days. The world shifted. The whole mentality has changed. It's shifted. Why? Accidentally? The world shifted. 10 meters in Japan? The whole shoreline moved, 8 feet. The day got shorter a little bit. It's like the whole world is shifting. These things, we don't believe in accident. Nothing happens randomly. If it's happening, there's a reason for it. What happened last Shabbos, there's a reason for it. Everything works out in the end according to Kosh Baruch Hu's Kosh bonus. Why this person? Why that way? Why this country? It's all part of a Kosh Baruch Hu's Kosh bonus, and we can look for the connections. We can find reasons why, but sometimes the reasons go back long before the immediate causes. No question, I'm sure it's tied to the boys that were captured and put in jail in Japan, and everyone's connection right away. But I'm not sure that's the whole reason for the entire disaster. There's a lot going on there. It could go back to World War II, when they were allies with the Nazis, and they wanted to throw the Jews in jail and not participate in saving the Jews from the Holocaust. There's all kinds of possible connections, things we don't know about necessarily. But the overall message is to impact us. It's just a small point. This is it's kind of funny, not so funny. But this whole thing with the flooding of Shabbos before from Japan and all that. It's like you think to yourself, it's awesome, right? It certainly catches your attention. But how much do we take it to heart? I tried to. I asked myself going through Shabbos, how much am I affected by all this? And it's true. It's not necessarily Jews. I'm sure Jews are there, but it's the Japanese people, and it's far away, and it's not really, what's my kesher? On one hand, it's like there's very small little kesher, but on the other hand, this is mankind. Because Baruch himself would not allow the Malach Sharis to sing Shira when the Egyptians were drowning, and they were really bad. They were really bad. They drowned Jewish children. Whatever they did was a lot worse. Because Baruch Hu We could sing Shira because we were having a Geula, but the Malachim, they couldn't sing Shira. Because the Baruch Hu says, this is my Yedid, this is my Yedid, this is the work of my hands drowning over here. So every Jew has to feel responsible on some level and take it to heart to some degree. So I was checking myself out, and thought to myself that maybe not as much as I should, And Motzi Shabbos, my son, was turning on the water. We have one of these faucets where, it's like a little extension thing, and you can press it like a little spray. You just press the button, the thing goes right off, and all the water goes flying across the kitchen. I think to myself, gee, that's interesting, Motzi Shabbos, after all this is going on. I'm thinking to myself, maybe perhaps I didn't take it seriously enough. There's a connection. The Jewish people, we're connected, and it affects us too. And if it doesn't affect us enough, of course, Baruch Hu brings it home. He brings it home to us until we finally become sensitized to what's happening, because it's a general message for everybody, but specifically Klal Yisrael. And back, in 2001, I'd seen something that changed my perspective. And you have to understand and appreciate this, because these are the details. Just for example, the same way that your body has a structure, has a skeleton, meaning that there's this bony thing inside of you that's holding together all the flesh. Without the skeleton, the flesh is nothing in the end. Without the flesh, the skeleton also not so much. But together they work, they hold the person up. The skeleton is like the backbone, literally, physically, holding the entire structure up. You may only see the flesh, but the skeleton is the basis. Believe me, my skeleton's warped to the right a little bit and affects the whole body. Just a little bit off, you feel it. They start going to the chiropractor. It's all connected. It's all one complete unit in the end. History also has a skeleton. We may only see the flesh. We only see the outside layer, the covering. But there's a skeleton. And if you know the skeleton inside, the structure of history, then you can better appreciate the meaning of the events as they're occurring. So what's that structure? So we're holding right now in 5771. What does it mean to anybody? What's 5771? All we know is that we've been around or at least the world's been around for 5,771 years. But beyond that, and then what? Then 5,800, and then 5,900, the 6,000, the 6,000, 6,100. Where does it stop? So the Gemara says very specifically, there are 6,000 years to history. 5771 with respect to 6,000 years of history, which means basically 229 years left of history. After having lived, Rabbi Kiva thought Mashiach was going to come in his time, Bar Kochba, the whole thing, that was 4,000. There is still 2,000 years of history left to go. It's a long time. But 229 years is not a lot of time. So, you got to wrap things up. Just like a shear. You get to, a certain point in the clock, it's start wrapping things up. You can't leave things hanging, or a simcha. You got to wrap things up. Because Baruch Hu's going to wrap up history at some point in time. We're only passing through. It's only a corridor. It's only a prose door. We're going someplace else. This is just this is the smorgasbord in advance of the big Suda that's coming up in the wedding hall. Don't get obsessed with this. So because Baruch Hu's bring it to a close. So bring it to a close. Things are going to happen to start wrapping things up. But 229 years of history is a lot of time still. It's more than one lifetime, 2 lifetimes. So who says what's happening today is all part of that? So the Vilna Gaon explains, and this is really what drove me to write the first book. Actually, this is only half of the story. The other half we'll say in a second, B'ezras Hashem, right? That it's not so pashut. So first of all, 5771 is significant because it's after 5750. 5750 is a major turning point in Jewish history. 5750. Why is it a major turning point? Because as the Gra explains, and Kabbalah explains, and a lot of times, you require the Kabbalah behind the structure behind the structure, to understand what's going on at the surface too. So as Kabbalah explains, we know that one day of Ma'aseh Bereshis corresponds to 1,000 years of history. Because just like a tree has roots, history also has roots. So for example, if you have 1,000 years of history, the first 1,000 years, they're rooted in the first day of creation. And the second day corresponds to the second 1,000 years, and so on and so forth. And the sixth day corresponds to the 6th millennium in which we're living right now. What's the significance of that? Explains the Vilna Gaon. Because everything that happened during Ma'aseh Bereshis is going to have a corresponding reality in the corresponding millennium. Whatever happened in Ma'aseh Bereshis is going to happen all through history. It's not an open book. It's not that what happened once a long time ago is finished and over, and we're rewriting history and new history all the time. No. History literally repeats itself on a different level. So whatever events took place during Ma'aseh Bereshis are going to come back again in the future. So he explains that if a person understands this and knows this, they can actually calculate the time the Mashiach is going to arrive. You can actually, he says, based upon my words, you can actually make the calculation because Mashiach's arrival is about Tikkun. And therefore it's going to come at a time that corresponds to the ideal time for Tikkun. So when is that? When was that? So if you make according to what he's explaining over here, turns out that Adam Rishon, as the Gemara explains, ate from the 8th of Das Tovara, from the 10th hour of history, the 10th hour of day 6. The Gemara explains, the 9th hour he was warned, the 10th hour before Shabbos he ate. We don't think about things like this because, it's in the Chumash, you learn it once a year, it comes around very fast, in fact, on Simchas Torah. We recite the Torah, we do Bereshis very quickly, depends upon where Simchas Torah comes in the week. There's times you have a whole week to learn, there's times you only have one day to learn, it depends on when the Chag comes around. But it says right there, the Adam Rishon ate, Nizdas Tovara. 10th hour, the Gemara explains, that's the time he ate. Everything about history is all about that. Even Jewish history is secondary to that. History, 6,000 years, whatever it takes, is about rectifying the chet of Adam Rishon. So therefore, says the Gemara, the time of Tikkun will correspond to the hour of time that Adam Rishon ate Nizdas Tovara. It sounds like a very technical detail, but it's a metzius. It's happening whether you accept it or not. It's a real reality whether you're focused or not. That's what's going on historically. We're here to rectify the chet of Adam Rishon. Avram started, Yitzchak completed, he was mamshich the process, Yaakov was the next stage, and the Jewish people have been rectifying, that's why we're called Adam, the Gemara says, we're called Adam in the Gemara because we correspond to Adam Rishon, rectifying his mistake, his chet. That's all history's been about. So therefore, the ideal time for Tikkun would be in the period of history that corresponds to when he ate from the Eitzdas Tovara. Make all the calculations, you can read the books, it explains it there, online, the whole thing. The bottom line is in 5750, that's when the Jewish people, the world, entered a period of time that corresponds to the 10th hour of day 6 of creation of history. The 10th hour of day 6 was the 10th hour. But the 10th hour of the 6th millennium is 83.3 years beginning from 1990. That was a turning point. I don't know if you paid attention. What happened back then? Well, Russia imploded. That was a starting point. Jews, for the first time, were able to emigrate without having to sacrifice their lives. They left behind their money in the end, but they could get out. Some went to Israel, some went to America, but they could get out. Russia imploded. No one saw that coming. So another klal, again, another klal, you cannot forget, Me'es Hashem Chaisa Zos, Hidiv is my name is David Melech. A klal of Jewish history is that which is wondrous in our eyes, it catches us by surprise. We didn't see it coming, we didn't expect it. That's from God, that's direct Hashgacha Pratis. Direct Hashgacha Pratis, that's the key phrase, direct Hashgacha Pratis. Everything is Hashgacha Pratis, but this is direct Hashgacha Pratis, meaning what? It's overt. Kadosh Baruch Hu, he's putting his hands on the wheels. Do you understand? He's putting his hand, he's like steering the car now. He's taking back control of history. Until 1990, it was chafif. Kadosh Baruch Hu, we had more freedom, we had more room. There was more Hester Panim, because Baruch Hu sort of stood back in the shadows and let the Jewish people and mankind do their thing. The Jews prospered in America and in Europe and everywhere. Anti-Semitism was reduced significantly. And it was almost gone in most places that were civilized. Not the Arab world, but the Western world. 1990, Kadosh Baruch Hu said, no, time's up. Right? 1986, Russia collapses, Operation Moses, then comes the Persian Gulf War. And most of us thought, the Persian Gulf War was a little scary, rockets, Scud missiles coming, landing in Israel, fantastic miracles. But the main point that the Persian Gulf War was lost in is because at the time we didn't see it. We didn't understand it. We didn't realize what it meant. But it's the very reason why the whole world's against us today. The Persian Gulf War was the beginning of that. And George Bush Sr., who wasn't so crazy about the Jewish people ever since we blew up the Iraqi reactor, if not earlier than that, was president at that time. And he froze $10 billion worth of loan guarantees because the Arab world said, you cannot use Saudi Arabia as a base unless you put pressure on the Israelis to stop building in Yehud and Shomron. They haven't done it up until now. Until that point, the Americans had sidestepped the entire issue. But that war forced the issue. Saddam Hussein, totally against all logic, goes into Kuwait, takes over the country, pulls the Americans across the ocean, right, to fight a battle on foreign territory with a people who, until that moment in time, was calling them the Great Satan. Remember that phrase? The Great Satan? Right? They used to always say, we're going to get the Israelis first, and then we're going to come after the Great Satan, America. They're next. No one should have been surprised by September 11th. Shouldn't have surprised. This is in the works for a long time. You know, the leaders of the Arab countries, that's what's coming out now. The leaders of the Arab countries, for the longest time, they learned to deal with the West because it was to their benefit. They're dictators. They did their own thing. They lived great lives. It was beneficial. They got weapons, they got rockets, they got planes, they got ammunition, they got money, gold, they got everything. But the people they were ruling got none of it, or very little of it. And they never changed their mind. The Great Satan remained the Great Satan for them the entire way through. The leaders, they could walk two sides of the line. Yeah, the Great Satan, but who happens to have a lot of money and gold and silver and fantastic devices, and it's worth it to us. We can benefit, but the people never change their mind. And those are the people who are now taking over the countries, who are throwing those dictators up because of the hypocrisy and taking over now. The situation, just see the hurricane, right, developing, the winds moving, the situation shifting. Israel's on red alert the entire time. They actually asked for $4 billion more of weaponry from the American government because they're worried about the situation in the Middle East, how things are developing. 20 billion. They know where things are going. They can sense where things are going. They know they're on top of this to some degree. They can see the Muslim Brotherhood. It's all right. Now it's just shifting. The whole thing's shifting. It's not shifting physically. It's shifting politically. And 1990 was a major turning point. So when 1999 came along as well, a little bit later, after 1990, became the Oslo Accord, right, and having to shake hands with Arafat. Can you imagine, give me the picture, having to shake hands with a murderer and terrorist? Thank God, the biggest miracle of all, Ehud Barak was prepared to give everything. Like 90% of the demands of the Arabs were going to be fulfilled when he was prime minister. Thank God Arafat is as crazy as he is devious in the end. Because he walked out. If he hadn't walked out of Camp David and signed, the situation would be completely different. Because Baruch, it was a tremendous Yeshua. Barak was totally disappointed. He was prepared to capitulate completely. He was thrown out. Major Ashkacha Pratis. But the writing was on the wall. You could see where things were going. And that's why Sharon, when he became prime minister, it was a big shift, big change. He also capitulated. He also went ahead and gave basically everything they wanted. Because Baruch said, okay, well, no more reason for you anymore. The same 2 weeks, it was an amazing thing. The same 2 weeks, the Yitzchak Kaduri, the great Kabbalist, was nifter, and a fantastic levaya, meaning that the Torah was tremendous. Ariel Sharon couldn't even die, let alone be buried in the land of Eretz Israel. You touch the land, just ask all the presidents. Every single president that's tried to touch this land gets destroyed politically. One way or another, they go down. George Bush Sr. hit an 80% popularity rating after the Persian Gulf War. No president has fallen as quickly as he did to lose the next term to Bill Clinton, Slick Willie. Remember him, Slick Willie, great president. Did he smoke drugs? Didn't smoke drugs, His wife is amazing that she still stayed married to him as president. He was actually impeached, but the Senate revoked him because it would affect the economy. But the guy's unbelievable. They're all sitting there shaking hands, him, Rabbi, and everybody. And he's gone too. Kodesh Baruch Hu's there. He's behind. He's manipulating. He's there. He has not abandoned us. He's been there behind the things. Things are happening. Things are changing, but he's there. He's directing. He's guiding. He's driving. He's taking the wheel out of the hands of man. We used to be the ones holding the straps. Not anymore. It's him. He's doing it. Everything. And 1990 was a major turning point. In 1999, right, with the advent of Y2K, it meant something different to the world than it did to us. It was actually a major threshold. I won't go through the whole thing right now, but Y2K equals the word Yabok symbolizing the Jewish growth, going from Asa to Israel. So that's also a Gans and Mesa story over here, very important part. But you could feel the change. And in 2001, on September 11th, when those planes crashed into the tower, there was a Kodesh Baruch Hu's way of saying, that's it, folks. From this point onward, history is moving quickly. We've got to get to this end already. We're all saying, what end? What end? What end? You know, who says that should be an end? Right? It's like, oh, fine. So 1990 was a major turning point. Fine, it was a 10th hour of history. Fine, there's no question from the period of Tikkun, but that can last 84 years. What's the rush over here? See, here is a very important key point. It's an amazing thing. You know, it's like the Sitra Achra is a fantastic way of covering up the important stuff. He'll give you like space. He'll give you, you know, a little bit of room. He'll allow you to be from. He'll allow you to keep Shabbos. He'll allow you to do all kinds of things, except that which will undo him, except that which will end his tenure. So therefore, to talk about Mashiach ben David, everybody can do that. The Yetzer Hara, the Sitra Achra, he doesn't mind that. If you talk about the Mashiach ben David, you know why? Because Mashiach ben David can only come after Mashiach ben Yosef has done his job. Talk about Mashiach ben Yosef, it's a different story. The one sefer that speaks about Mashiach ben Yosef in detail, the only sefer that I'm aware of that actually talks about it, and it's such an important sefer, it's an instruction book. It tells you what we're supposed to do at the end of history to move from being passive to active, to end all the shtuyot and all the suffering. Because we're just in a passive mode. We're just passively sitting here waiting, counting down the days, hoping the situation will get better on its own somehow. The Kodesh Baruch Hu have Rachmanis and mercy and just like, you know, end the suffering already, but it's not. More people lost, more disaster, storm clouds developing in the horizon. And the one book that tells us what we're supposed to do, Kol Torah, written based upon the manuscripts the Vilna Gaon has passed down through his Talmidim until today, technically verified that it's authentic, is controversial. So people don't learn it. And people don't talk about it. It gets pushed to the side. You know why? Because that's the book that's going to change history. That's the Gaon's teachings will change history. People know this material, they can participate as partners with the Kodesh Baruch Hu in history and change the situation. So it won't be so volatile and so dangerous, and we're not so vulnerable. But he pushes that aside. Go ahead, talk about Mashiach ben David all you want. Write the books, write the stories, the novels. Mashiach ben Yosef, don't talk about that. Don't get involved in that. Because that will change you, and you will change history. And if you change history, I'm finished. Because my job will come to a conclusion earlier than planned. It's pushed aside. So Kodesh Baruch Hu says, okay, you're not going to participate. You're not going to become active. You want to remain passive? Here, watch this. You just still look at the pictures. You still see the movies. It's just, this very day is absolutely remarkable. It's just totally astounding. History is this weird thing. It's this really weird thing. Whereas if you try to, I remember this very day, I was sitting in my office. I can still see my posture. I was tired from writing it. I was sitting at my laptop in my office, a small little office in Telstone, writing away, actually writing about the situation, how it's going to change soon dramatically, because of Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to bring us home in the 9th hour, or 10th hour, right? And I'm sitting there like literally like stretched out, my feet are stretched out. I'm sitting there looking at my laptop, uninspired for the moment, right? How will I say something that's going to make people change their mind? How will I get people to open their eyes and realize Eretz Yisrael is where it's at? If you can't physically get there, at least emotionally get there intellectually, how am I going to do that? My friend calls me up and he says, you won't believe this. Someone just flew a plane into the Twin Towers. So, I said, that's not funny. As I said, that's not funny. I couldn't imagine that. I could not imagine that. He said, no, I'm serious. It's on the news. So immediately I went online to try and find it. Couldn't get into anything. Everything was shut down. Couldn't find it. I was in Suffolk. I wasn't sure. He calls me back about half an hour and says, you won't believe it. A second plane. Just, and then the pictures start coming and the videos start coming, the whole thing. Conspiracy, whatever the situation. But the bottom line is, whomever Kodesh Baruch Hu used to bring down those towers, Whether it was a conspiracy, whether it was not a conspiracy, whether it was everything, it doesn't make a difference. They came down. And it changed the world. And we Jews, at that point, should have said, come on, that kind of thing doesn't just stop happening. This is like it happened out of nowhere. I mean, there are a lot of miracles involved, negative miracles, but miracles nonetheless. But it happened. It's like this thing where you're stuck between two realities. It shouldn't have happened, but it did happen. It shouldn't have happened, but it did happen. So like we're like Twilight Zone, limbo over here, where it shouldn't have happened, but it did happen. So you can't argue the reality. It's like it's right there. You can't pretend it didn't take place. It's right there on the screen. It's in the newspapers, and everyone's talking about it, but it shouldn't have happened. So the it did happen part is really, after the fact, it's inconsequential. It changed the world and all that. But the first part is what concerns the Jewish people. It shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened. There's no way. But it did happen anyhow. And if it did happen, it shouldn't have happened, then the Baruch Hu made it happen in the end. And if he made it happen, it wasn't simply because he was taking revenge against the Americans. Because, whatever, Baruch Hu, he said, be nice to the Egyptians. They were hosts for the Jewish people. With hosts like that, they'd rather go, in the streets and not have to stay someplace like that. But they were hosts. The Americans are much better hosts than the Egyptians were. Dangerous place, spiritually perhaps, but still, because Baruch Hu wasn't just taking revenge. It was something. It was a change of history. It was a message. Because Baruch Hu from the Jewish people, the end is coming. The end of it, not the end, Armageddon, sun blowing up the earth and all that. No, just the end of history as we know it, because Mashiach is a thing. Not a thing. Mashiach is a reality in waiting. You understand? Everyone's sat in the waiting office before, in a doctor's office. The kind with the triple book, right? And sit for he'll be right with you 1 hour from now, right? You're sitting there, and he says, the tenth already, So Mashiach is tense. He's after Mashiach. I want to come. I'm not go already. I'm going to come and save the Jewish people. Look at the suffering. The world is not ready yet. They're not ready yet. The world's not ready yet. But it's getting to the point where it has to be ready. Just like Shkia on Shabbos, right? Not ready yet. That sun is not going to, for Yeshua, it stood still, right? For you, not likely. Right? It's just going to keep going down, and you can't fake it because Shabbos is going to be Shabbos and it's going to come. You have to be prepared to start in advance, start early. You have to change the Metzias while you still can, not after the fact. We're always responding after the fact. We're not anticipating. We're not reading history. So the Zohar says this. The Yehuda Nasi confirms it. Rav Yitzchak Atana also comes into the picture. The Leshem, Shavua Chama, Rav Shlomo Eliashiv, the grandfather of the present-day Ashkenazi Gadol Ador in Yerushalayim, his grandfather, the great Makubal. When someone went to and asked the question, to the Rebbe Rav Chaim Kanevsky, the Leshem said, is this true? Right? The Leshem says it, and he does. He says it very specifically, black and white. The Zohar says there's a thing called Techiyas HaMesim. Techiyas HaMesim is resurrection of the dead. Kind of like what you feel like after Shabbos. Sunday, Monday, resurrection, but it's a real resurrection of the dead. Where basically the world is transformed. Now most people assume that takes place after the year 6000. Says the Zohar, no, might be dumb. It takes place before 6000. And the Zohar says, the Leshem quotes, and he says the following thing. How much before 6,000? 210 to 214 years in advance of 6,000. And you should know, says the Zohar, that that's after the 40 years of Kibbutz Galius. 40 years of Kibbutz Galius, 214 years of Techiyas HaMesim, of resurrection of the dead, which we speak about. It's right there, the Shemona Esrei. I'm not making it up. Go look for yourself. We talk about it all the time. Mechayim Mesim. We're all going to come back at some point in time in the future, advance to 6,000. And Techiyas HaMesim, the Leshem explains, there's no room for Mashiach there. Mashiach is over by that time. The world is already, like Shemayim to some degree. It's after Yemos of Mashiach. Yemos of Mashiach is already come and gone. Anyhow, Kibbutz Galius, the ingathering, the exile takes place before it begins, 40 years. So based upon this, you have to go back and say, 6,000, subtract 214. subtract 40, or if you go into Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, 210 subtract 40, is 250 in advance of 6,000. All of a sudden, turns out that according to Rabbi Yitzchak, the Chis Amazing takes place in 15 years' time from now. 15 years' time from now. 15 years is? After 5,771 years, 15 years is? It's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. There are things I can still remember planning 15 years ago. And I'm already at the age I'm supposed to have done them. They're still not done yet. I can remember 15 years quite clear. I was going back 25 years, 30 years. 15 years is a very quick period of time. Before it's over. In other words, and even though in 1990 we began the 10th hour of history, the period of Tikkun, according to the Zohar, history has to wrap itself up in 15 years' time. Just swallow that for a second. 15 years' time. What's for supper tomorrow night? What are we doing for Shabbos? Shabbos, the kids are coming in, and I was like, gotta go shopping tomorrow. What did you say? 15 years' time? What's that supposed to be? 15 years? I was once listening to a talk. It was part of the Discovery Seminar. And it was a 3-day seminar. And in the seminar, what they do, basically, they build up, gradually for the punchline. The punchline is supposed to get people, at least get the people who could be gotten, right? And like 25, 30, 40, like a group of this, about 30 people. Most people are not religious at all, right? But they've been exposed to an ongoing message that Torah, more than likely, is not written by man or random, but probably given by God. And the punchline was, at that time, it's been many years since I've been there, but at that time the punchline was that if you to understand and appreciate how the Torah could not be random, if you got one of those super fast Cray computers, today they have different ones, I know, but that time that was the super fast computer, was a supercomputer, that was the term, right? To actually print out Sifrei Torah in Hebrew, not English, right? In Hebrew, one after the other, randomly, right? It would have to circle, let's say it was one long cloth the entire way through. It would have to circle the earth 360 some odd times, at least, before you finally got to a Sefer Torah, like the one we have, with all the miracles and gematrias and ramazim that are built into it. In other words, it's impossible, or close to it. Or 10 to the negative 18, which is a number beyond anyone's comprehension. Which at that point in time, people should stand up and say, wow, is that true? Is that confirmed? Is that really the reality? It's fine. Where's my keeper? Where's my tzitzis? Where's my shaitel? Whatever. I'm going to be religious right now on the spot. That's what's supposed to happen. What happened instead? Some people went to the bathroom. Some people just stood there like this, heard the point, right? Left, walked out, probably never came back. And maybe out of 40 people, 2 or 3 people were impacted. But the whole week they were probably impacted. And more than likely they were impacted because in their childhood there were things that opened them, exposed them to God and the possibility, and they were impacted. But we just don't hear the point. So I heard the point. It hit me. It hit me not to write the book, the first book, to try to give people an understanding how things could evolve, that people could see how things would evolve and eventually become, Yemot the Mashiach, where, just like trace things. Ezu Chacham or is a Nagid? Who's the Chacham? Somebody who can see what's going to be born. You have to see what's going to be born. Look what's happening today and see how it projected. So when I wrote the book the first time, it was actually very interesting because, as a writer, how much people write, but writing Parashat Shvush, even essays on current events is no big deal in terms of how it affects your emotion intellectually. You see something, you write about it. Some things are more emotional than others. Depends like what happened last Shabbos. Basically, it's a hard thing to write about. But for the most part, you're writing, trying to expose people to the depth of Torah and Chazal. And it's a wonderful experience. It doesn't affect your emotion. You write, get up, go get a cup of coffee, have a cook, you talk to somebody else on the phone, come back, pick up where you left off. It's not emotional. But once I began to write the novel, and I had to use my imagination to conceive of things because the sun was still shining back then. The world was still mesudar. It was still normal. I had to fake it. I had to pretend it wasn't. So of course, my imagination got involved. It really got involved, and I would be writing furiously, and it inspired the whole thing. And the book became my world. So I'd walk at the front door to the bus and I'd be like looking like this, Is there like missile falling from Iran? I said, no, don't worry, it's okay. It's the world's still okay. There's no sirens going off. Iran's not threatening right now. Nuclear power for them is still years off. But it would take over my reality because I was so involved in it. But it didn't take very long to calm back down again because I'd go back out to read the newspapers, and the world, for the most part, was still somewhat sane, if that actually was ever the case. But it was still saner than it was today. When I wrote the new version, it was a different story. The first version, the first book, I had to make it up. I had to put the story in there and make it sound real for people who are reading from the outside, to drag them in and share my imaginative reality. Not with the second book. The second book, the newspaper kept dictating the next chapter. History kept telling me what to write about next. And when I had the fears, the same fear of the situation that the book was describing, the fears were real. Because the situation in the world was real. In a sense, the change from writing the first book to the second book is a tremendous measure of how much the world has shifted politically and geographically and you name it. Every possible change that's going on. Why? Why? What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu want from us? So it's like, in 2001, the world woke up. A little bit. An alarm clock went off. The Jewish people was a little bit earlier, but even that didn't do the job, right? The Spar attack, the suicide attack on the restaurant in Rehov Yafo, King George there, if you still remember that, terrible attack. It was a wake-up call for the Jewish people, but the rest of the world didn't get the message. They thought that when the Twin Towers were attacked later on, that was just the Jewish and Arab war spilling over onto American soil. They didn't realize it was a war against America. So George Bush Jr., to delicately sidestep the issue, declared a war against terrorism. It's really a war against the Arab world, because most of them are terrorists, or they support terrorism. Even the Germans, the Nazis, was different. And there was no question that the leaders were animals. And they were the worst of humankind. But so many Germans, even though they were guilty of being followers and not refusing orders and all the things they claimed that interfere with their being good human beings in the end, different. The average German has the potential to be like that. That's what we saw. But they didn't live like that. They were neighbors with the Jews before all this happened. Before Hitler and Yamach Shmo came along and transformed them into the Nazi party and the whole thing, the Jews and the Germans got along with each other. It's not like that with the Arabs. You just watch the photos of the mothers and the children and what they think, what they believe is all across on all levels. And they go to foreign countries. We have an idea. The Jewish people have a concept of halacha, dina, the malchusa dina. What does that mean? Right? It's a Gemara about Basra. It's a few places, right, brought down. That if the law of the land that we're living amongst is a civilized place, and they have dinim, and they have laws, and they have courts, and they try to administer justice. Okay, it's not when they know it, but they're doing the best they can to be as just as possible. Just they get corrupted, whatever, but the structure is there. And they have laws that apply to everybody for the most part. And if their laws do not make a Jew contradict Torah in any way, you're mechuyev to keep them. You have to keep them. Because that's the law of the land. That's how Jews function in Chutz La'aretz, outside the land. It's Israel for sure. We have it in the Torah law. That's what it's supposed to be. But amongst the Gentile nations, that's the way we live. They go and they set up Sharia law in their face. Specifically, purposely. They'll crowd the streets of Paris and they'll have a prayer session and block traffic, and the police are powerless. They'll pass a law, you can't walk around wearing a burqa in the streets, and they'll still do it, and the police are powerless to stop it. And they'll do the same thing in America. They'll go there, and a daughter of some Arab father who happens to be dating somebody, whatever, will go out and kill his daughter as part of a religious killing because that's Sharia law. And that's what they'll do. Some will integrate, some perhaps will accept for the most part, but the basis, I remember reading once a statement by a professor, I think it was Harvard, an Arab professor at Harvard, statement that was quoted in one of the Arab newspapers. You would never know he was part of the intelligentsia. You'd never know that he was an Arab professor. He sounded just like everybody else in the end when he spoke to his own people and what he believed, what he thought. spreading all around the world. Why? Because the Jewish people have to become resensitized. Everything taking place today is just all part of a wake-up call. Mashiach is just dangling. You can't begin to imagine. 1990 is now 21 years ago. 21 years into the period of Tikkun. Techisa Mesim, just 15 years away. History is wrapping up. It literally is wrapping up. You think it's a coincidence that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave back the land of Israel to the Holocaust, the Jewish people? It's just a coincidence. And in those 70 years since doing that, the land got built up. And the population has been shifting towards Israel more and more with each passing year. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes ahead and has a thing called Nefesh B'Nefesh, just reading the history of Nefesh B'Nefesh, and how it began, and how multi-millionaires got involved and backed it up. And next thing you know, Jews are being how many countries do you know? How many people do you know fly their own people back to their homeland, give them money to start off with, because they want them here, at a time of history that everybody else will be running the other direction? We're in the lion's den over here. In the lion's den, yet a protective shield. Because here is where the Shekhinah is. Kadosh Baruch Hu is bringing the end. And is bringing the end very fast. And the events of today are speeding things up. And a novel idea, a new thing, because until now, it was just all these events happening one after the other that sped things up. But now time actually was sped up. The day got a little bit shorter. I can't believe the day got shorter. I don't have time for that. It's like, Kadosh Baruch Hu is like, Mitzamtzim. So I'll just leave you with one more detail as part of that skeleton and part of that structure to be able to understand and appreciate what we're holding today and what Kadosh Baruch Hu is in fact doing. It's Kabbalistic, and I can't go through all the details right now. It'd be a shir unto itself. But it's an important point nonetheless because it dictates what's happening right now in history. There are two koiches in history, two koiches in the Olam, in the Bria. Two main koiches, Chesed and Gevura. Chesed you're familiar with, Baruch Hashem, you're doing kindness. You don't ask questions, you just help out, you give tzedakah, you give your time, whatever, you help, it's open, it's a nice thing, Chesed. What's Gevura? Simsum, discipline, right? Holding back, not giving tzedakah, being stingy. It's a negative force. There's times when you have to be mitzamtzem, you have to be more gevura oriented. There's times where chesed is the order of the day. It goes back and forth, back and forth. The worst is to be chesedik when it's time for gevura, or to be gevuradik when it's time to be chesedik. But gevura is something we're here to rectify. The chesed is what we use to rectify. So, for example, just to give you a nice example of what I'm talking about, right? When you feel like doing an avera, you feel a certain push to do an avera, or maybe you don't have that, maybe you're too righteous for that, right? Or you feel a certain koich not to do a mitzvah. I don't want to get for davening right now. I don't want to do this Tehillim business. I don't feel like it right now. You should be doing it, but you don't feel like it. So the force holding you back is gevura in the mitzvah, or the force pushing you to do the avera is gevura. It's gevura, right? Now, when you resist and you do the mitzvah anyhow, that's called mituk hagvuras, the sweetening of the gevura. You sweetened it. It was going to overcome you. It wanted to stop you from doing the mitzvah, and you did the mitzvah anyhow. You are the master of that gevura. Or you were about to do the avera, you caught yourself, and you held yourself back, right? You did mituk gevuras. And the reason why that's so important to know, because that's the currency of the world to come. That's your spending account. That's your trust account. Your chelik in the world to come, when you get there, like how you wire money to, you're going to Florida for vacations, you get an American Express traveler's check, or say you go to a foreign country, you get by shekels or by dollars, right? So, when you go to Olam Haba, you also require currency to buy things up there. And that's sweetened gevuras, what we'll call mituk gevuras, sweetened gevuras. Now here's the punchline. There's only a certain amount of it. And every last gevura has to be used up and sweetened or used up by the time Mashiach comes. When it's used up, Mashiach comes. That's the ikuv. The ikuv in history from Mashiach arriving is the amount of gvuras left over. So, for example, the Holocaust was a major mituk gvuras, because all the Mesiras Nefesh and all the dying and all the torture, everything the Jews were forced to go through, used up a lot of gvuras. And that's why Eretz Yisrael was born immediately after that. Because Eretz Yisrael had to be born. 1948 was destined to be the time the land was given back to the Jewish people. We established our homeland once again for thousands of years, but we weren't ready. Too many gevuras were stopped. Look at the history. Too much gevur was stopping us. Unfortunately, we didn't rectify it ourselves. Through Torah mitzvahs, it happens then historically. That's the pattern of history. Mashiach has to come. That was Eretz Yisrael. Now Mashiach has to come. He's just waiting. Believe me, he's just like, I didn't see him yet. He hasn't spoken to me. I wish he had. So I'm also waiting too. You know, he just wants to come. Because Baruch Hu, Mashiach ben Yosef, I'm quite sure, has already come and gone. Already done his job. And there's reasons for that. Based upon the Gra, other things. And Yishmael is one of the key reasons why. Because Mashiach ben Davis is the Gra. His job is to conquer Yishmael. Amalek, Edom, they're pretty much gone at this stage of history. They're only doing what they're doing because of Yishmael. It's all Yishmael. They're everywhere. They're controlling everything. Don't you feel it? Don't you see it? I mean, they're everywhere. Because that's Yishmael. So Mashiach ben David, that's his job. And that's why, as the Arabs, they rebel, and the government starts to topple, right? That's the biggest symbol of all. The end's coming. Because Yishmael goes down, Mashiach comes. One and the same thing. Price of oil skyrockets, the whole, these are all ramazis. It's coming, but there's gevuras that have to be sweetened. They have to be rectified. Last Shabbos, a lot of gevuras got used up. In fact, the pictures that are circulating, this is the first time I've ever seen such pictures circulating of what happened. Couldn't go to sleep last Motzei Shabbos. Made the mistake of looking at those pictures before going to bed. Those pictures, the baby was stabbed the most of all of them. And the 12-year-old girl who came home to find or to see this, to know about this, he's like, tears your heart out. Just tears you apart emotionally. How do you go on? You can feel the gevura. Major mitzvah gevuras. That's the question Kosh Baruch Hu is asking us right now. How much, folks? How much more? How much more mituk has to come through me and not you? The more you do, says the Gra, right? The famous machlokes about Mashiach ben Yosef dying in battle, says the Ramchal, says the Gra, it's not absolute, depends upon us. How much we do in advance of his arrival, how prepared we are. Are you prepared? Baruch Hashem, we're here. Where's Israel? You came, ideologically we're here because we know the end is close. We want to be in the right place at the right time, and that's important. Because we said 1,000 times before, or 900 times at least, right, that safety for the Jew is defined by being where God wants you to be when he wants you to be there. It has nothing to do with proximity to the conflict. So the Twin Towers top the world. You could be thousands and thousands of miles away. You could be in Utah. You could be in California. It doesn't make a difference. Because you have to be where Hashem wants you to be when he wants you to be. That's the definition of safety for the Jew. So we're here, Baruch Hashem. But are we ready? Are we really ready? Intellectually, emotionally. So that's why I wrote the second book. The second book was just part of that preparation process. We have to get in the frame of mind. We have to realize that our generation, after how many generations, going back to Har Sinai, right? 3,320 years like that, going along to our generation, is the generation it's probably going to Mekabel Panei Mashiach. Are you ready for that? Is that part of your vocabulary? Your intellectual and emotional vocabulary. Is that what we're holding right now? And your relatives back in Chutz La'aretz, wherever they may possibly be? Is it part of their mentality? Are you connected? Are you sharing this? Is it your focus on this? Or just pratish, just everyday life? We have to be ready. The more we prepare, the more prepared we are. The more meat to the gevuras comes through us. The less we have to go through what the rest of the world is going. Because Kosh Baruch Hu is telling you, the end is coming and it's coming fast. And he's shifting things. And major disasters are happening. And the weather has been changing dramatically. And snow taking place in places that never got snow before, or in places where you got snow but never that much before, and other places where it's been warm. Did you notice? that most of the rains have come in Israel since Tu B'Shvat? Hafuch. Completely, you know what Tu B'Shvat is? When the rains stop. The best rains are supposed to come from the fall until Tu B'Shvat, and then it starts getting towards Pesach. It was dry, it was a drought, until Tu B'Shvat. And then Tu B'Shvat starts raining. It's like, my lawn is green right now, in spite of the fact that it hasn't been watered by a single Mam Torah the last 3-4 months, because the rain has been coming. Hafuch. That's how Kosh Baruch talks to us. He says, I'm here, I'm controlling the situation, I'm in charge. Come drive with me. Be a part of it. Share that mentality. You'll be prepared. What's coming up, it won't pull you down. And you won't despair. And you'll be zoiche, makabel p'nei Mashiach b'shalom.